Met the neighbor from hell? Here's how I turn the tables. Have you ever wondered how a simple holiday celebration could spiral into a months-long legal battle? Let me tell you how I accidentally burned down my neighbor's fence, nearly got conned out of $10,000, and ended up winning big in court. I'm Jack, and I was just 18 when this all went down. I was working for a security company, constantly pulling 16-hour shifts due to frequent no-shows. It was exhausting, but I was young and naive, often not getting home until 8 a.m. Around the 4th of July, I finally had a day off. My best friend Mike was back in town on vacation, and we decided to celebrate with some good old American fireworks. Looking back, I should have known better. I'd never had good luck with fireworks, but hey, what could go wrong? We laid out our haul on the floor: sparklers, bottle rockets, cakes, and Roman candles. Let's start with the sparklers, since it's not dark yet, I suggested. Brilliant idea, right? We headed into my backyard, not realizing it hadn't rained in over 2 months. The grass was bone dry. You can probably see where this is going. A tiny spark from our sparklers hit the ground, and suddenly we had 2 small fires that quickly spread. I ran for the garden hose, but it was useless. The fire was spreading faster than I could spray. I handed Mike the hose and called 911. What felt like hours was only 4 minutes, but the fire had already reached my neighbor's fence. Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor, came out surprisingly calm. She grabbed her hose and started spraying down her side. When the fire department arrived, I convinced Mike to leave. No need for both of us to get in trouble. I told the arson investigator the truth, that I was alone in the backyard playing with fireworks. They commended me for my honesty and let me off without charges. Crisis averted, right? Wrong. A week later, Mrs. Thompson knocked on my door. She handed me 2 papers, a fence quote for $4,000 and a lawn care estimate for $6,000. Both looked suspiciously like they were typed up in Microsoft Word. Then she dropped another bombshell. You'll also be paying my water bill for 3 months for the new yard. Now let me paint you a picture. Mrs. Thompson's old fence was falling apart, and her yard was nothing but dead grass and weeds. Suddenly, she wanted a mahogany fence and a backyard worthy of a magazine cover. I told her I needed to get my own estimates. The next day, I had a handyman come out. Mrs. Thompson ran out, yelling that I didn't have permission to get an estimate on her fence. She even called the cops, but they couldn't do anything. The estimate came in at $1,200 for the fence. I also got a quote for $800 to reseed her lawn. Mrs. Thompson wasn't having it. She insisted her contractors were the only ones allowed to work on her property. After a heated argument, she finally agreed to accept $2,000. We planned to meet at the notary the next morning to sign the agreement. I showed up with cash and a contract, ready to put this behind me. I waited for 3 hours, but she never showed. Instead, she called to say the $2,000 wasn't enough, and her guys were already starting the work. For months, I watched as her backyard transformed into an oasis, complete with a small pond. Later, I discovered she'd been planning this remodel for ages and even used the extra money for a trip to Hawaii. How did I know? She bragged about it on our neighborhood Facebook group, not realizing I was a member under a different name. Just when I thought it was over, I got served with court papers. Mrs. Thompson was suing me for $10,300. At 18, I had to hire a lawyer and prepare for court. In the courtroom, I laid everything out: the original quotes, records of her harassment, proof of her bragging online. The judge looked at Mrs. Thompson and said, "Ma'am, with all due respect, you're out of your daggum mind. This young man offered to pay more than he was legally required to. You're only entitled to $1,200 for the fence, minus his lawyer fees." In the end, I only had to pay $400. Mrs. Thompson took a huge financial hit. She ended up having to sell her house and move to a smaller place due to all the debt she'd racked up. As for me, I learned some valuable lessons about responsibility, keeping records, and the importance of getting everything in writing. Oh, and I haven't touched a firework since. Sometimes the best revenge is letting karma do its thing.